the world did not end. This surprised a great many people who had spent 2 years since the broadcast expecting it to. They had expected panic, war, the dissolution of systems that held civilization's fragile arrangements in place. They had expected the sky to look different. They had expected themselves to be different, changed at the root by the knowledge that they had never been alone, that the Watchers had always been here, patient in their leather chairs, reading the city the way geologists read stone. Some of that happened. There was panic, in places. Political convulsion. Months when the architecture of the ordinary world felt provisional in a way it never had, as if the rules holding things in place had been revealed as local agreements rather than eternal truths, subject to renegotiation. And then, because this was the thing Vael had observed for 2 centuries and which the Council had been too careful or too frightened to fully account for, the world adjusted. Not rapidly. Not painlessly. It was the adjustment humans make to every rupture in their understanding of themselves, the same movement, at civilizational scale, that Vael had observed in individual lives across 41 lifetimes. Denial. Anger. The long territory of renegotiation. And finally, not resolution, never resolution, but something called integration. A new fact added to the world, and everything reshaping around it. Vael was present at the first formal session of what became known as the Joint Commission, a body with no precedent in human or council experience, invented in real time with all the friction and misapprehension and occasional grace that characterizes building things under uncertainty. He sat with Zenith, who was no longer pretending to be Richard Holt, and 3 human representatives, a diplomat, a philosopher, and a doctor of public health whose inclusion was Mira's insistence. They spoke about what comes next. What came next was not a protocol. That word was retired. What came next was a conversation, 2 centuries in preparation, and by any honest accounting at least that long to conclude. But it had begun. Mira sat to Vael's left, where she had positioned herself since the garden and intended to remain, not as an ally in the transactional sense, but as someone who had staked her understanding of the world on a direction and decided to keep moving in it. She had her notebook. Facts, questions, the kind of notes a person makes when witnessing something for which adequate language does not yet exist, preserving space for it to arrive. Sara sat at the back of the room and said nothing, and said more in that silence than anyone at the table. She was what neither side had designed for and both sides must now account for, proof that the categories themselves were insufficient, that the boundary between watcher and watched had been permeable long before anyone admitted it, and that what had been classified as violation might, in the longest view, have been preparation. After the session, Vael stood at the window. Not Portland. Not Seattle. Geneva, where the human habit of settling difficult questions runs deep enough to constitute a tradition. The lake below was grey-blue with early winter, still and enormous. He thought about the girl in the red raincoat. He had seen her once since the broadcast, from a distance, as always, except she was 13 now and had stopped pausing to look at the sky on her way home from school. He did not find this sad. The looking was never about the sky. It was about the looking. She had other ways now of doing what that look had always done, reaching toward something large and unnamed and possibly kind, at the furthest edge of what she could imagine. All of them did. That was what 200 years had finally taught him. Not the taxonomy of human behavior. Not the catalogue of conflicts and art and brief, incandescent lives. The essential thing, they were always reaching. The reaching never stopped. And of all the ways it is possible to break a heart, the most irreversible is to stop short of what you were reaching toward. He had reached. The record was made. The conversation had begun. Outside, Geneva continued its ancient complicated life, folding the extraordinary into the ordinary the way water folds around stone, not erasing it, but holding it, and moving on.